Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to talk about the medial thigh muscles. So most of these muscles are muscles that are going to adduct the thigh. The one that doesn't fit neatly into that adduction kind of activity is the obturator externus. But this is really the best place to put this muscle because it's innervated by the obturator nerve as well as all the other medial thigh muscles are. And in addition to that, it pretty much sits in the same place. And if you're doing a dissection on a cadaver, this is the compartment where you will have the easiest access to the obturator externus. So I thought it'd be good to put that here. In terms of the bony landmarks for this whole area I covered in the previous video. So I'm going to put that up right now. So first of all, we're going to start off with this point that's back here. Okay, so remember, actually let's start off with this. Remember that this right here, right, this whole crest on the superior margin of the ilium, this is known as the iliac crest, okay? That's your iliac crest. And remember that the iliac crest is going to terminate anteriorly into a spine. It's also going to terminate posteriorly into a spine. So this spine that it terminates into posteriorly over here, this is called the posterior superior iliac spine. Okay, there's a posterior superior iliac spine. Likewise, directly inferior to that, you see another projection of bone right there. This is going to be your posterior inferior iliac spine. Okay, your posterior inferior iliac spine. And we're going to have the same pattern happening on the anterior side for those anterior spines. Okay, yeah, you see I'm fiddling over here with this little arrow thing. Okay, so on the anterior side we have the same pattern. So we're gonna have anterior superior iliac spine. Okay, that's this little projection of bone right there. And then we're also gonna have the anterior inferior iliac spine. Okay, anterior inferior iliac spine. Nice. All right. So then after that, what we're going to have is this other spine right down there. Okay. That's projecting posteriorly. And that is a spine that is located on a bone known as the ischium. Remember that this innominate bone is actually three bones that fuse together during embryogenesis. And so we categorize them as such: the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. So this is the ischium back there. And that specific spine is known as the ischial spine. Okay. Then we're going to have this notch that is created between the ischial spine and the posterior inferior iliac spine. That notch right there is called the sciatic, I should be more specific, the greater sciatic notch. Okay, the greater sciatic notch. Then let's look at the rest of this innominate bone. So we're going to have the pubic tubercle, which is this projection of bone right there. So pubic tubercle. Okay. Then we're going to have this part right up here, right? So this whole thing is known as the body of the pubis. Okay. And so this up here is going to be the superior pubic ramus. Superior pubic ramus. Okay, and then we're going to have an inferior pubic ramus. Okay, inferior pubic ramus. If you want to know more information about this innominate bone in detail, I have a completely separate video that I'm going to link right here on just the innominate bone, and it goes into detail so you can know those landmarks cold. All right, so then we have this foramen right here. This is the obturator foramen. Okay. It transmits the obturator nerve into the medial compartment of the thigh to control all those hip adductors. Now let's move on to the femur. So we have over here this part of the femur right there that's fitting into the acetabulum of the innominate bone, right? So the acetabulum is the socket of the hip joint, and the femoral head is the ball that fits into that socket. Okay, so we have the femoral head. The femoral head is going to be that round ball right there, and then directly inferior to it right there, we're going to have the femoral neck, right? And let me see, I could just put this up right there. All right, and then we have these two trochanters of the femur. The one that's on the lateral side, the larger one, that's going to be our greater trochanter. And then this one right here is going to be our lesser trochanter. Okay. Then we're going to have the shaft, right? I'm just going to call it the femoral shaft. You could also call it the shaft of the femur. All right. And then we look at the distal part of the femur. And what we're going to see is that the femur as one of the long bones, it's going to terminate into two condyles distally. Okay. We have one condyle that is on the medial side, one condyle on the lateral side. Okay. So we have the lateral condyle. Okay. And then we're going to have the medial condyle. Okay. And now notice that directly superior to the medial condyle, I labeled this little bony bump right here. Okay. That is an attachment site for a muscle we're going to see later called the Adductor Magnus. And so this is called the adductor tubercle. Okay. The adductor tubercle. Then we have this little floating sesamoid bone right here anterior to the knee joint, and that is the well-known patella. Then we're going to have, if we look distal to the patella, we're going to see now on the tibia, okay, on the proximal portion of the tibia, we see this rough patch right here, this little rough patch that's kind of shaded. Okay, that's a tuberosity, and that's a tuberosity where all the quadriceps muscles are going to insert there. Okay, it's not called a quadriceps tuberosity. It's named after the bone that it's on. So it's called a tibial tuberosity. Okay, the tibial tuberosity. Then if we look over here, directly lateral, kind of lateral and superior to that, there's going to, this part of the bone that I labeled over here. You can't really tell too much from this drawing, but it's like a little tubercle that'll or little rough patch that's there. You'll see it on an actual real bone model. Okay, and that's going to serve as an attachment site for a huge band that runs on the lateral side of the thigh. Runners will be very familiar with this band. It's called the IT band. Okay, so the IT band is going to insert itself onto this point right here. This is known as, well, colloquially is known as the Gerdy's tubercle. Gerdy's tubercle. Okay, I didn't mean colloquially. I meant something else. I forgot what was the other term that I meant. It's basically the term that you use whenever you name something over after a person. An eponym. I believe that's what it is, an eponym. Okay, so then we have over here, remember that the leg is going to be composed of two bones in a similar fashion how the forearm is. So we have the tibia, and then we also have the fibula, right? The fibula. And so this part of the fibula that is articulating with the tibia right here, okay? This is known as the fibular head. Fibular head. And we're going to see that there's a muscle that we're going to see that there's muscles that attach to that fibular head. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about the fibular neck, and that's the last thing, right? The fibular neck is the part directly inferior to where the head is. All right, straightforward. Okay, straightforward. If you need to go over this a couple of times to stick it in your brain, go ahead. Okay, now we're back here, so let's go to these hip adductors. So the first one is the Obturator Externus. Now, the Obturator Externus is the twin cousin of the Obturator Internus, okay? The only difference is where they lie in relation to this obturator membrane and foramen, okay? So remember that this hole right here is the obturator foramen. This foramen is actually lined by a membrane, okay? And on the outer side of that membrane out here is going to be the Obturator Externus. And on the inner side of the membrane, inside the pelvis of the body, right, inside the pelvic cavity, is where you will find the Obturator Internus. Okay, that's where you'll find the Obturator Internus. So it's attaching, so the externus is attaching to the membrane to the external rim of the obturator foramen, and then from there it runs posterior to the neck of the femur and inserts itself onto the trochanteric fossa. Okay, so that's going to look like this. Okay, that's going to look like that, and it's going to go ahead and be it's going to function as an external rotator along with all those other small hip rotators that we saw in the gluteal region. Okay. Next, we have the Adductor Magnus. Okay. Remember that the Adductor Magnus is split into two parts. And in a previous video of the posterior thigh, we talked about the hamstring part, okay, that functions with the rest of those posterior thigh muscles. Now we're going to talk about the adductor part that functions with these medial thigh muscles, okay? So the attachment for the whole muscle as a whole is going to be onto the ischial tuberosity right back here, the inferior pubic ramus, the ischiopubic ramus, okay? So realize that the ischial tuberosity, the ischiopubic ramus, and the inferior pubic ramus are all one continuous bony structure, okay? So this is where Adductor Magnus gets its name of Magnus from, okay? It's a very wide muscle that attaches to this whole entire bony process right here, okay? And then from there, it's going to go to insert onto the linea aspera. Remember that the linea aspera is a point behind the femur, right? It's a long line behind the femur on the posterior aspect of it. And then we're going to have the adductor tubercle down here, okay? The adductor tubercle. And like in the previous video for the hamstring part, I underlined the attachment sites that function as the adductor over here, okay? So the fibers that run from the inferior pubic ramus to the linea aspera, they have more of a oblique, nearly transverse, but more oblique kind of orientation to them. So they pull on the linea aspera and pull the femur to go medially that way, okay? So they cause adduction at the hip, okay? That's what that looks like. Next, we're going to talk about the Adductor Brevis, okay? And remember, this is all going in layers. So we're starting deep and we're working our way more superficial. So the Adductor the Obturator Externus is the deepest one. Then the Adductor Magnus will be superficial to that. And now the next one would be the Adductor Brevis, okay? The Adductor Brevis is attaching to the body and the inferior ramus of the pubis right here, and then it goes to insert onto the proximal 1/3 of the linea aspera, okay? So it's attaching to the linea aspera along with a bunch of other muscles that we've talked about, but specifically on just a proximal 1/3, okay? So it's a short and not too wide muscle that's going to run like that, okay? And if you have a brevis, you're also going to have a longus, okay? So we're also going to have an adductor longus that is going to be superficial to that, which attaches to this body of the pubis, and instead of the proximal 1/3, it attaches to the middle 1/3 of the linea aspera, like so, okay? And that's how you're going to see that. Next, we're going to talk about gracilis. Remember what I said. In each compartment, there's one muscle that attaches to the pes anserinus. This is the one from the medial compartment. Starts from the body and inferior ramus of the pubis, runs to attach onto the pes anserinus, so that's going to look like that, okay? And that's essentially it. Those are all the hip adductors, and they're all innervated by the obturator nerve. Gross anatomy is one of the most difficult subjects in the world. Luckily, it doesn't have to be. Anatomy is one of those subjects that needs constant verbal and visual repetition in order to get good at. What better way to reinforce this information than with the scientifically validated method of drawing? Neuroscience has shown us that we retain information better when we physically draw it out. That is why the Gross Anatomy Study Strategy Workbook is designed to walk you through all the layers of the musculoskeletal system, allowing you to draw the muscles into place. This is excellent for reinforcing muscle attachments, bony landmarks, muscle names, and actions. This will save you tons of time from mind-numbing tactics such as repetitive flashcards or passively listening to boring lectures. With this strategy, you can actually begin to enjoy studying again and have a much better way to retrieve the information. Order a copy of the Gross Anatomy Study Strategy today at the link below so you can spend less time being stressed and more time being blessed.